At 62 years old, I thought I knew my son Jake completely. Last Tuesday night, crouched behind Mrs. Patterson's garden shed at 11:59 p.m., watching my own house like some deranged private detective, I realized how wrong I'd been. When that clock struck midnight and I saw what emerged from my basement, my heart nearly stopped beating. The truth about my 31-year-old son wasn't just shocking, it was dangerous. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This nightmare began 3 weeks earlier when I noticed Jake's hands shaking over morning coffee. The first sign something was terribly wrong came on a Thursday morning when I watched Jake's coffee mug tremble in his grip. Not just a little nervous shake, but a genuine tremor that made the ceramic clink against his teeth. When I asked about it, he brushed me off with a quick "just tired from work" and headed out to Thompson's Auto Repair, where he'd been employed for the past 8 years. Jake had been living with me since his divorce from Amanda 6 months earlier. The split had been rough on him financially and emotionally, but I welcomed having my boy back home. After losing my wife Martha 5 years ago, the big house felt too empty anyway. Jake had always been steady, reliable, the kind of son who never gave me a moment's worry growing up. Even during his teenage years after Martha passed, he'd stayed on the right path while his friends got into trouble. But over the next few days, I noticed more changes that didn't sit right. His phone would ring at odd hours, around 10 or 11 at night, and Jake would step outside or disappear into the basement to take these calls. When I'd casually ask who was calling so late, he'd get defensive, claiming it was work-related or just friends checking in. The explanations felt hollow. Then came the deliveries. Expensive-looking packages arriving when Jake wasn't home, left on the porch by courier services I didn't recognize. When I mentioned them, Jake would quickly grab the boxes and take them straight to his room or the basement. I glimpsed enough to see electronics, packaging, designer clothing tags, items that didn't match someone struggling to pay child support and rebuild after a costly divorce. "Where's this money coming from?" I finally asked one evening when he walked in carrying shopping bags from high-end stores. "Got some overtime at the shop," he replied without meeting my eyes. "Thompson's been busy with that fleet contract." I'd called Thompson's garage the next day under the pretense of scheduling my truck's oil change. Old Pete Thompson mentioned business had been slow, not busy, no overtime available for anyone. Jake's girlfriend, Sarah, started acting strange too. She'd been a regular visitor, usually stopping by after her nursing shifts at County General Hospital. Sweet girl, always polite, seemed to genuinely care about Jake. But lately she appeared nervous during her visits, jumping at sudden sounds, cutting conversations short. Last week, I caught her and Jake having what looked like an intense argument in hushed voices on the back porch. When I approached with iced tea, they immediately separated and forced smiles. The late-night visitors bothered me most. Cars would park down the street around 9 or 10 p.m., and Jake would walk out to meet whoever was inside for brief conversations. Never the same vehicle twice. Always quick exchanges, maybe 5 minutes. Then Jake would return looking agitated or relieved, depending on the night. I found myself staying up later, watching from my bedroom window as this pattern repeated several times a week. The visitors never came to the door, never introduced themselves. Jake would stand by their driver's side windows, sometimes receiving envelopes or small packages, occasionally handing over items I couldn't identify in the dim street lighting. My background as an insurance investigator for 30 years kicked into high gear. I'd learned to trust my instincts about people hiding something, and every instinct was screaming that Jake was involved in something dangerous. But what? Drugs seemed like the obvious answer. But Jake had never shown interest in anything stronger than beer. Gambling debts? He'd never been a betting man. Some kind of fraud? Jake was honest to a fault, the type who'd drive back to return extra change from a cashier's mistake. The basement became off-limits around this time. Jake claimed he was setting up a workshop down there, needed privacy to work on projects. He installed new locks on the basement door, expensive electronic ones that required a code. When I jokingly asked for the combination in case of emergencies, he deflected with promises to give it to me later, then never brought it up again. Strange smells occasionally drifted upstairs from the basement level. Not quite chemical, not quite organic. Unfamiliar odors that made me wonder what kind of projects required such unusual materials. The electrical bill jumped significantly that month. Our basement had always been used for storage, with minimal power consumption. Suddenly, we were using 3 times the normal electricity. Neighbors started mentioning the increased traffic. Mrs. Patterson from across the street asked if we were having work done, noting all the different vehicles coming and going. Bob from next door commented on people visiting at unusual hours, wondering if everything was okay with our family. Jake's appearance changed too. He'd lost weight, developed dark circles under his eyes, started wearing clothes that didn't fit his personality, designer shirts instead of his usual work gear, expensive sneakers that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. When I complimented his new style, he became uncomfortable, claiming Sarah had picked everything out as gifts. But Sarah worked long shifts as a registered nurse. Her salary was decent, but not enough for the designer wardrobe Jake was sporting. Something wasn't adding up in their financial situation either. The breaking point came when I needed to borrow Jake's truck for a doctor's appointment. My vehicle was in the shop, and Jake readily agreed to let me take his pickup. While adjusting the seat, I accidentally knocked some papers from the glove compartment onto the floor. Among the usual registration and insurance documents, I found a second cell phone, not just any phone. A cheap burner phone, the kind people buy with cash when they don't want calls traced back to them. I'd seen enough of these during insurance fraud investigations to recognize one immediately. My hands shook as I scrolled through the message history. Cryptic texts filled the screen. Delivery complete. Payment received. Tuesday collection. References to amounts that could have been money, drugs, or something else entirely. The most recent message, received just that morning, made my blood run cold. Basement ready. Midnight operations start this week. I quickly returned the phone to its hiding spot and finished my errands in a daze. My son, my honest, hard-working boy, who'd never given me a moment's trouble, was involved in something that required secret phones and midnight operations. The realization hit me like a physical blow. That evening, I watched Jake more carefully than ever before. Every nervous glance, every defensive answer, every quick exit to take phone calls outside. The pattern was clear now that I knew what to look for. Jake was living a double life, and whatever his secret operation involved, it was about to escalate significantly. Sleep became impossible after discovering that burner phone. I spent the entire night reviewing every strange behavior, every suspicious detail I'd noticed over the past few weeks. My background as an insurance investigator had taught me to document everything, so I started keeping detailed notes about Jake's activities. The license plates of those late-night visitors became my first priority. I positioned myself strategically near the front window each evening, camera ready. Over the next week, I photographed 7 different vehicles. My contacts at the local police department, built during 30 years of insurance fraud cases, helped me run those plates discreetly. The results chilled me to the bone. 2 of the vehicles belonged to men with criminal records. Drug possession, theft, assault charges. Not the kind of people my son should have any reason to meet. I stared at their mugshots on my computer screen, trying to understand how Jake could be connected to such individuals. Jake's work schedule became another focus of my investigation. I called Thompson's Auto Repair several more times, always with legitimate-sounding excuses, but really to verify Jake's hours. Pete Thompson mentioned that Jake had been taking unusual breaks, sometimes disappearing for 2 or 3 hours in the middle of the day. Probably dealing with his divorce stuff, Pete had said sympathetically, but I knew Jake's legal issues had been resolved months ago. Sarah's visits to our house decreased dramatically. When she did come by, she looked terrified. I noticed her hands shaking when she thought no one was watching, similar to Jake's morning coffee tremors. During one visit, I offered her tea and noticed her glancing around nervously, as if expecting someone to appear. "Is everything all right, dear?" I asked gently. "Oh yes, Mr. Ashton," she replied quickly, but her voice cracked slightly. "Just tired from double shifts at the hospital." I checked with my neighbor whose wife worked at County General. Sarah hadn't been pulling double shifts. In fact, she'd been leaving work early several times recently, claiming family emergencies. The lies were multiplying, involving both Jake and his girlfriend in whatever scheme was unfolding. Jake's bank statements became accessible when he asked me to handle some mail while he worked late. I wrestled with the ethics of opening his financial documents, but decided my concern for his safety outweighed privacy considerations. What I found made no sense. Large deposits appeared randomly in his account. 2,000 here, 1,500 there, sometimes 5,000 at once. But these deposits were immediately followed by withdrawals in cash or transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Jake's checking account would spike dramatically one day, then drop to nearly zero the next. The cash purchases explained his expensive new wardrobe and electronics. Credit card statements showed high-end clothing stores, computer equipment, smartphone purchases, items worth thousands of dollars, all bought within the past month. This wasn't mechanics' wages or divorce settlement money. This was income from something else entirely. My utility bills revealed another troubling detail. Our basement electrical consumption had tripled in the past 6 weeks. Whatever Jake was doing down there required significant power. I tried to remember what legitimate projects might need that much electricity. Workshop tools, computer equipment. The electronic locks on the basement door suggested technology was involved somehow. Memories of Jake's childhood and teenage years haunted me during this investigation. After Martha died in that car accident 5 years ago, I'd thrown myself into work to cope with grief. Maybe I'd missed signs of problems developing. Jake had seemed to handle his mother's death well, staying focused on school and his job training. But perhaps he'd buried emotional issues that were surfacing now. His marriage to Amanda had appeared solid for 7 years. They'd had their problems like any couple, but nothing that suggested serious dysfunction. When they announced their divorce, Jake claimed they'd simply grown apart. Amanda moved to another state for a fresh start, leaving Jake feeling isolated and financially strained. The combination of divorce, stress, financial pressure, and emotional vulnerability could make someone susceptible to bad influences. Criminal organizations often recruited people during their weakest moments, when they were desperate for money and belonging. The thought of my son being manipulated this way made my chest tighten with anger and fear. Community news reports added another layer of concern. Recent articles in our local newspaper described sophisticated drug operations being discovered in suburban neighborhoods throughout the region. Police warned that criminal organizations were recruiting ordinary people, often young men with financial troubles, to participate in distribution networks. These operations differed from traditional street dealing. They involved technology, careful planning, and residential locations chosen specifically to avoid suspicion. Reading these articles while thinking about Jake's basement workshop and unusual visitors made patterns click into place. I needed concrete evidence before confronting Jake or calling police. Accusations based on suspicious behavior wouldn't be enough, especially if I was wrong about the extent of his involvement. My son deserved the benefit of doubt, but also protection from whatever dangerous situation he'd gotten into. The electronic locks on the basement door presented a challenge. During Jake's work hours, I attempted various common codes without success. The system was more sophisticated than simple numeric combinations. Through the small basement window on the side of our house, I could glimpse equipment that looked expensive and complex. Multiple computer screens glowed in the basement darkness. Tables covered with devices I couldn't identify from my limited viewing angle. Most disturbing was a bulletin board covered with photographs and papers. From outside, I could make out what appeared to be images of various houses in our neighborhood, along with handwritten notes. Why would Jake have surveillance photos of neighbors' homes? The implications frightened me. This wasn't just about personal drug use or small-scale dealing. The organized nature of what I was observing suggested something much more serious. The final piece that convinced me to take drastic action came during Jake's lunch break on a Thursday. I watched from my bedroom window as he met with someone in a black sedan parked 3 blocks away. The meeting lasted longer than usual, almost 20 minutes. When Jake returned to the house, he immediately went to the basement and began making phone calls. I could hear his voice through the floor, though not specific words. The tone was urgent, sometimes pleading. At one point, I heard him say loudly enough to make out, "I can't keep doing this much longer." That evening, Jake's behavior reached a new level of anxiety. He paced around the house, checking windows repeatedly, jumping when the phone rang. Sarah called, but he wouldn't let her come over, claiming it wasn't safe. When I asked what wasn't safe, he snapped at me to mind my own business, then immediately apologized for his harsh tone. "I'm sorry, Dad. Just dealing with some work stress. Nothing for you to worry about." But I was worried. Terribly worried. My son was clearly in over his head with something dangerous, and traditional approaches weren't working. Direct questions got deflected. Gentle probing was met with lies. Professional help couldn't be sought without evidence. That night, staring at the ceiling in my bedroom, I made a decision that would change everything. If I couldn't get the truth through normal means, I'd have to use more creative methods. Jake needed help whether he realized it or not, and I was running out of time to provide it safely. The plan that formed in my mind was risky and would strain our relationship if discovered. But doing nothing while my son sank deeper into criminal activity wasn't an option. Martha would have known what to do, how to reach him emotionally. Without her guidance, I'd have to rely on investigative instincts and hope they led me to answers before it was too late. The deception plan crystallized in my mind during another sleepless night. If I couldn't get answers through direct questioning, I'd create an opportunity to observe Jake's activities without interference. The idea of spying on my own son felt like betrayal, but protecting him from whatever dangerous situation he'd entered took priority over family protocols. My sister Linda in Phoenix became an unwilling accomplice in my scheme. We rarely spoke more than twice a year, usually during holidays, so calling her required careful planning. When I explained that I needed to visit unexpectedly, her confusion was obvious. "Visit me? Ashton, you haven't been to Phoenix in 12 years. Is everything all right? I need some time away from home," I told her, crafting a story about feeling restless in retirement. "Maybe help you with those home repairs you mentioned last Christmas." Linda's bewilderment continued because she'd never mentioned home repairs, but she graciously agreed to cover for me if anyone called, though she clearly thought stress was affecting my judgment. Her agreement gave me the alibi I needed. Jake's reaction to my travel announcement confirmed every suspicion. When I casually mentioned planning a week-long visit to help Linda with maintenance projects, his relief was unmistakable. For someone who rarely left me alone for more than a day, his enthusiasm about my extended absence felt wrong. "That's great, Dad. You deserve a break. When are you leaving?" "Tomorrow morning," I replied, watching his face carefully. His immediate response was to make several phone calls, stepping outside for privacy as usual. Through the window, I observed animated conversations, hand gestures suggesting excitement or urgency. Whatever Jake had been planning was being accelerated because of my supposed departure. Packing for the fake trip required attention to detail. I loaded my suitcase with clothes appropriate for Phoenix weather, gathered toiletries, and made a show of preparing for travel. Jake offered to drive me to the airport, but I declined, claiming I preferred to leave my truck in long-term parking. The night before my departure, Jake's basement activity intensified. I heard power tools running until late, sounds of heavy objects being moved around. At one point, footsteps crossed overhead as if he was bringing items up from storage. When I went downstairs for a glass of water, I noticed muddy footprints tracked through the kitchen, leading from the basement door to the back exit. Sarah visited that evening for the first time in over a week. Their conversation on the back porch was heated but whispered, too quiet for me to overhear specific words. Body language told the story, though. Sarah appeared to be pleading about something while Jake kept shaking his head. At one point, she grabbed his arm desperately, and he gently removed her hand while looking around nervously. When they came back inside, both tried to act normal around me. Sarah's smile seemed forced, and Jake kept glancing toward the basement door as if worried about something down there. I offered them coffee and tried to engage in casual conversation, but both seemed eager for me to go to bed. "Big day tomorrow," Jake said pointedly. "Don't want you oversleeping and missing your flight." I retired to my room but stayed awake, listening to continued activity throughout the house. Around midnight, I heard the back door open and close several times. Peering from my bedroom window, I saw Jake carrying what appeared to be equipment or supplies to his truck, then driving away for about an hour before returning with the vehicle apparently empty. Morning came with Jake acting solicitous about my travel plans. He helped carry my suitcase to the truck, reminded me about checking in with Linda, and even hugged me goodbye with more emotion than usual. As I drove away, I could see him in my rearview mirror, standing in the doorway watching until I disappeared around the corner. The deception began immediately. Instead of heading to the airport, I drove to a cheap motel across town and checked in under a false name using cash. The room was clean but basic, perfect for my needs since I'd only use it for alibi purposes. I spent the day at a nearby shopping center, purchasing surveillance equipment from an electronics store and a private investigation supply company. Night vision binoculars, a directional microphone, recording equipment, and a small digital camera with telephoto lens. The total cost made me wince, but Jake's safety was worth any expense. I also bought dark clothing and a sleeping bag for extended outdoor observation. Returning to my neighborhood after dark required careful planning. I parked 3 blocks away and walked through backyards, avoiding streetlights and main roads. Mrs. Patterson's house across from mine provided the best vantage point. Her backyard had mature trees and bushes offering concealment while maintaining clear sightlines to my property. Setting up the surveillance position took longer than expected. I needed spots for both visual observation and audio recording, with escape routes planned if discovered. The equipment felt unfamiliar in my hands despite decades of insurance investigation work. This was more intensive than anything I'd done professionally. Jake's truck returned to the driveway around 9 p.m. He parked and sat inside for several minutes, making phone calls. From my position, I could see him gesturing animatedly, occasionally looking frustrated or angry. When he finally entered the house, lights came on in several rooms before focusing on the basement. Through the basement window, I observed Jake setting up what appeared to be sophisticated computer equipment. Multiple screens, keyboards, devices I couldn't identify from my distance. The bulletin board I'd glimpsed before was clearly visible now, covered with photographs and documents arranged in organized rows. My heart stopped when I recognized some of the photographs. They showed houses throughout our neighborhood, but not random pictures. These appeared to be surveillance photos, taken at specific angles, showing security systems, entry points, and daily routines. Notes were attached to each image with handwriting too small to read from outside. Jake worked methodically, checking connections, testing equipment, occasionally consulting papers spread across a table. This wasn't the behavior of someone casually involved in minor criminal activity. The organized, professional appearance of his operation suggested serious criminal enterprise. Around 11 p.m., Jake began making more phone calls. Through the directional microphone, I caught fragments of conversation, references to timing, schedules, and what sounded like coordination with other people. Several times I heard him mention midnight, always in context of being ready or prepared. Sarah arrived unexpectedly around 11:15, using a key to enter through the back door. I could hear raised voices through the equipment, but couldn't distinguish specific words. Their argument continued for 20 minutes before Sarah emerged, looking distraught. She sat in her car for several minutes, crying, before driving away quickly. Jake's agitation increased after Sarah left. He paced around the basement, made more phone calls, and several times went outside to scan the street as if watching for someone. The tension in his movements suggested something significant was approaching. At 11:45, I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Mrs. Patterson, my elderly neighbor, was approaching my hiding position with surprising stealth. My heart raced as I prepared explanations for my presence in her backyard, but her first words shocked me. "I wondered when you'd figure it out, Ashton," she whispered, settling beside me behind the large oak tree. "Been watching this unfold for weeks." Mrs. Patterson's appearance changed everything. This 78-year-old widow, whom I'd known as a quiet retiree who kept to herself, obviously understood far more about Jake's situation than I'd realized. Her calm demeanor and prepared surveillance position suggested she'd been monitoring activities longer than I had. "How did you know I'd be here?" I asked quietly. "Saw you setting up equipment earlier," she replied, producing her own binoculars. "Been expecting someone to finally investigate what's happening across the street. Just surprised it took this long." Mrs. Patterson's knowledge extended beyond casual observation. She showed me a detailed notebook filled with license plate numbers, visitor schedules, and behavioral patterns going back 6 weeks. Her documentation was thorough, professional, and deeply concerning. "My late husband was a police detective," she explained. "Taught me how to conduct surveillance properly. When strange activity started at your house, old habits kicked in. Her revelation that she'd been systematically documenting Jake's activities while I remained oblivious felt both embarrassing and relieving. At least I wasn't facing this situation alone anymore. "There's more you need to know," Mrs. Patterson continued, checking her watch. "Wait until midnight. You will see everything." The certainty in her voice, combined with the timing reference Jake had been mentioning all evening, made clear that whatever operation was unfolding would reach its climax in minutes. My decision to create this surveillance opportunity was about to reveal truths that would change our family forever. Mrs. Patterson's presence transformed my amateur surveillance operation into something more serious. Her confident demeanor and professional equipment suggested she understood aspects of Jake's situation that I was only beginning to grasp. "How long have you known something was wrong?" I whispered as we adjusted our positions behind the oak tree. 6 weeks exactly," she replied, consulting a detailed notebook I hadn't noticed before. "Started the same week your boy came home looking scared. Been documenting everything since then." Her documentation was extraordinary. License plates, visitor schedules, photographs taken with telephoto lenses, even audio recordings made with directional microphones. Mrs. Patterson had been conducting a one-woman investigation while I struggled with suspicions and partial observations. "Why didn't you say anything to me?" I asked. Mrs. Patterson's expression grew sad. "My grandson Tommy went through something similar 2 years ago in California. Different city, same pattern. When family members get involved too early, it usually makes things worse for everyone." She explained how criminal organizations specifically target young men facing financial and emotional stress. Tommy had been recruited after his girlfriend left him, and he lost his job. What started as small favors for easy money gradually escalated into serious criminal activity with no clear escape route. "These people are experts at manipulation," Mrs. Patterson continued. "They find vulnerable spots and exploit them systematically. Your Jake fits their profile perfectly. Recent divorce, financial pressure, living with family, girlfriend with professional reputation to protect." The mention of Sarah's professional reputation caught my attention. "What does Sarah have to do with this?" Mrs. Patterson showed me photographs taken with powerful zoom lenses. Sarah entering and leaving our house at unusual hours, always looking distressed. Sarah meeting with Jake in parking lots away from both their workplaces. Most disturbing, Sarah having brief conversations with strangers in vehicles I didn't recognize. "They're using her as leverage," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Hospital workers have access to patient information, work schedules, financial data, perfect for identifying targets." The scope of what she was describing made my stomach clench. Jake wasn't just involved in some minor criminal activity. He was part of an organized operation using sophisticated methods and multiple unwilling participants. "Tommy tried to get out once," Mrs. Patterson continued quietly. "They showed him photographs of his sister at her school, his mother at the grocery store, his father leaving work. Made clear that cooperation wasn't optional anymore." Her grandson's story ended tragically. Tommy attempted suicide rather than continue participating in activities that were gradually destroying innocent people's lives. He survived, but suffered permanent emotional damage. The criminal organization moved to a different area before police could build cases against them. "I won't let that happen to another family," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "Especially not neighbors who've always been kind to me." She revealed that her surveillance had extended beyond just Jake's activities. Through careful observation and research, she'd identified the criminal organization's structure and methods. Her late husband's police training had taught her how to build evidence systematically. "They call it financial harvesting," she explained. "Use technology to access bank accounts, steal identities, manipulate electronic transactions. Much more sophisticated than traditional robbery. Harder to trace, bigger profits, lower risk of detection." The basement equipment I'd observed through the window wasn't for drug dealing or simple theft. Jake was being forced to participate in high-tech financial crimes that could destroy hundreds of innocent people's financial security. Mrs. Patterson's research had revealed similar operations in suburban neighborhoods across 3 states. Young men like Jake served as frontline workers, operating equipment and taking risks, while criminal leaders remained safely distant from direct involvement. When operations got too risky or profitable enough, the leaders would disappear, leaving their recruits to face legal consequences alone. "The timing is crucial tonight," Mrs. Patterson said, checking her watch again. "Major operation goes live at midnight. First time the leadership will be physically present. Best chance to expose the entire network before it spreads further." Her certainty about timing came from weeks of careful observation. Normal visitor patterns had intensified over the past few days. Jake's stress levels had reached obvious peaks. Most significantly, equipment deliveries and installation activities suggested preparation for something much larger than previous operations. "How do you know they'll be here at midnight?" I asked. Mrs. Patterson smiled grimly and produced a small electronic device from her jacket. "GPS tracker on the license plate of their main coordinator's vehicle. Been following movement patterns for 2 weeks. Vehicle arrived at staging location an hour ago." The sophistication of her surveillance operation astounded me. This elderly neighbor, who I'd always seen as a quiet retiree tending her garden, had been conducting professional-level intelligence gathering while maintaining perfect cover. "There's something else," she added, her expression growing more serious. "Your wife Martha's death 5 years ago. The car accident that killed her. I don't think it was accidental." The words hit me like physical blows. Martha's death had devastated our family, but police investigations found no evidence of foul play. Mechanical failure caused her car to skid off the road during a rainstorm. Case closed. Grief endured. Life continued without her. "Martha worked at First National Bank," Mrs. Patterson continued. "Had access to customer financial records, transaction patterns, security protocols. 6 months before she died, she'd been asking questions about unusual electronic transfers involving several local accounts. Bank records from that time period showed Martha had flagged suspicious activities for investigation. Large amounts moving between accounts in patterns that suggested money laundering or identity theft. Her supervisors had promised to investigate but took no action before her death. After Martha died, those investigations were quietly dropped," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Someone with influence made sure her concerns disappeared from bank records. No follow-up, no additional security measures, no consequences for anyone. The possibility that Martha's death was connected to current criminal activities involving Jake created connections I'd never considered. If the same organization had been operating locally for years, they might have identified our family as a threat long before targeting Jake directly. They've been watching your family since Martha's death," Mrs. Patterson continued, "waiting for the right opportunity to neutralize any remaining threats while gaining useful assets. Jake's divorce created perfect conditions. Understanding dawned with horrible clarity. Jake's recruitment wasn't random. Criminal leaders had specifically chosen him because of Martha's previous investigation and our family's potential knowledge of their operations. Using Jake gave them control over both eliminating threats and gaining technological assets. Tonight's operation will fully implicate Jake," Mrs. Patterson said. "Once he's completely compromised, they'll have permanent leverage over your family. Insurance against anyone reviving Martha's investigation or causing future problems." 11:58 p.m. according to my watch. Vehicular movement became visible at the far end of our street. Multiple cars approaching slowly, methodically, with coordinated timing that suggested military or law enforcement training. "Federal agents have been alerted," Mrs. Patterson said quietly. "Took weeks to convince them, but evidence finally became overwhelming. They're positioned around the neighborhood waiting for criminal leadership to expose themselves." The elderly neighbor who'd surprised me with her surveillance skills had accomplished what I couldn't have managed alone. She'd built relationships with law enforcement, gathered evidence, and coordinated professional response to a threat I was only beginning to understand. "Your job now is to stay calm and keep Jake safe," she instructed. "When midnight arrives, you'll see everything. But remember, he's a victim here, not a criminal. Don't let anger at his deception cloud your judgment about who really deserves blame." 11:59 p.m. Vehicle doors closing quietly throughout the neighborhood. Footsteps approaching through darkness. Equipment being activated in Jake's basement. Sarah's car pulling into our driveway, despite the dangerous timing. Midnight arrived, with the precision Mrs. Patterson had predicted. The clock struck 12 and my world exploded into chaos I never could have imagined. 3 black vehicles materialized simultaneously at the end of our street, moving with military precision toward my house. Through the basement window, I watched Jake frantically typing at computer keyboards, while 5 individuals I'd never seen before directed his activities. Mrs. Patterson handed me higher-powered binoculars, and suddenly I could see details that made my blood freeze. The basement had been transformed into a sophisticated technology center with banks of computers, multiple monitors displaying what appeared to be banking websites, and communication equipment that looked like military-grade hardware. "Look at the screens," Mrs. Patterson whispered urgently. Bank account information scrolled across multiple monitors in real time. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moving between accounts with electronic transfers happening faster than I could track. This wasn't small-time criminal activity. Jake was operating equipment capable of stealing massive amounts from multiple financial institutions simultaneously. The 5 strangers in my basement moved with professional coordination. A woman who appeared to be the leader directed activities, while 4 men handled security and technical support. All wore dark clothing and communication headsets, speaking in coded references I couldn't understand. Through the directional microphone, fragments of conversation became audible. "Transfer complete to account 7. Backup systems online. Schedule holds for next 12 locations." The scope of their operation extended far beyond my house and neighborhood. Jake's body language showed terror mixed with reluctant compliance. His hands shook as he followed instructions, occasionally stopping to wipe sweat from his face. Several times he appeared to question orders, only to have the female leader point to something on a tablet that immediately silenced his objections. Sarah's unexpected arrival at midnight complicated everything. She used her key to enter through the back door, but instead of going to Jake's room, she headed straight toward the basement. Through our surveillance equipment, I watched her descend the stairs and immediately begin arguing with the criminal leader. "This has to stop." Sarah's voice carried clearly through the microphone. "Jake can't handle much more of this pressure." The woman's response was cold and professional. "Miss Walker, your cooperation ensures your continued employment and clean professional record. Jake's cooperation ensures your safety. The arrangement benefits everyone." Sarah's forced participation became clear. As a registered nurse at County General Hospital, she had access to patient records containing detailed financial information about wealthy community members, social security numbers, insurance information, addresses, family details. Perfect data for identity theft and targeted financial crimes. "Show her the photographs again," the leader instructed one of her associates. Sarah's reaction to whatever images they displayed was immediate and devastating. She began crying while covering her face with her hands. Jake moved to comfort her but was prevented by one of the men. "Hospital security cameras captured interesting footage from your Christmas party last year," the leader continued. "Unfortunate that someone put something in your drink. Even more unfortunate that someone decided to photograph the results. Medical board tends to take professional conduct seriously." The blackmail scheme targeting Sarah was sophisticated and cruel. She'd been drugged at a hospital party and photographed in compromising positions without her knowledge. Now those images were being used to force her cooperation in criminal activities that violated everything she'd worked to achieve professionally. Jake's involvement followed similar coercion patterns. The basement computers displayed photographs of him at various locations around town, apparently taken without his knowledge over several months. Timestamps showed surveillance had begun shortly after his divorce, when he was most emotionally vulnerable. "Your father's insurance investigation background makes him potentially valuable," the leader told Jake. "Cooperation now prevents unfortunate accidents, like what happened to your mother." The casual mention of Martha's death as unfortunate accident, in context of threatening Jake, confirmed Mrs. Patterson's suspicions. Martha had been murdered to prevent her from exposing this criminal organization 5 years ago. Now they were using Jake to ensure our family's permanent silence. Banking information continued flowing across computer screens. Account numbers from dozens of local residents. Real-time access to their financial data. Electronic transfers stealing amounts small enough to avoid immediate detection, but large enough to fund extensive criminal operations. Phase 1 completion in 60 minutes, the leader announced. "Jake, Initiate the hospital system penetration. Sarah's access credentials were being used to hack into County General's computer network, providing entry to patient records, employee information, and financial data for thousands of additional potential victims. The scale of identity theft and financial fraud they were planning dwarfed anything I'd imagined. Jake's reluctant compliance with each instruction broke my heart. My son was trapped in a situation where resistance meant danger to himself, Sarah, and potentially me. Every keystroke was destroying innocent people's financial security while ensuring his own deeper involvement in criminal activity. Mrs. Patterson nudged me and pointed toward movement at the far end of our street. Federal agents in tactical gear were positioning themselves around the neighborhood with precision that suggested extensive planning. Their timing was perfect, waiting for maximum criminal exposure before acting. They needed the leadership physically present, Mrs. Patterson whispered. These people never expose themselves directly. Tonight's operation was important enough to require personal oversight. The female leader, who'd been identified through surveillance as Carol Morrison, former NSA contractor turned criminal entrepreneur, was worth millions in stolen funds and wanted in 6 states. Her capture would dismantle an entire network of technology-based financial crimes. Equipment worth over $2 million filled my basement. Direct access to banking networks through hospital system vulnerabilities. Real-time coordination with criminal cells in Atlanta, Denver, and Seattle. Plans to steal over $50 million within the next 3 months. Jake's forced participation was just beginning. Tonight's operation was a test run for much larger theft planned throughout the region. If successful, he'd be moved to other locations, forced to train additional young men in similar situations, gradually becoming more involved until escape was impossible. Sarah's professional credentials provided access to multiple hospitals through reciprocal networks. Patient records from 7 medical facilities could be accessed through her login credentials. Hundreds of wealthy families had been identified as targets for comprehensive identity theft. Final phase initiation, Carol announced. Transfer protocols to maximum capacity. Computer screens erupted with activity as massive electronic transfers began simultaneously across dozens of accounts. Numbers climbed rapidly through hundreds of thousands toward millions. Real-time theft of retirement funds, savings accounts, investment portfolios belonging to innocent families throughout our community. Jake's hands were shaking violently as he followed instructions, tears streaming down his face as he realized the scope of destruction his forced participation was causing. Sarah stood frozen in horror as her credentials facilitated access to patient records for criminal purposes. Suddenly, Jake stopped typing and stood up from the computer. "I can't do this anymore," he announced. "I'm done." Carol immediately drew a weapon and pointed it toward Jake. "Sit down and continue the transfers." At that exact moment, the basement erupted with federal agents crashing through multiple entrances. Smoke filled the air. Shouting echoed from every direction, and Carol swung her weapon toward Jake as agents closed in around her. My son was about to be killed, and I was still crouched behind Mrs. Patterson's oak tree, watching through binoculars instead of protecting him. 30 years of insurance investigation had taught me about criminal behavior, but nothing had prepared me for watching my son face death while I remained safely hidden. Without thinking, I abandoned my surveillance position and ran toward my house. Every instinct screamed against leaving my safe position behind Mrs. Patterson's tree, but watching Carol's weapon aimed at Jake triggered protective instincts that overwhelmed rational thinking. I sprinted across the street as federal agents swarmed through my house's main entrances, their attention focused on securing the criminal leadership while my son remained in immediate danger. The basement window I'd used for surveillance became my entry point. Years of investigation work had taught me alternative access methods, and I'd memorized every detail of my own house's vulnerabilities. The window latch gave way easily, allowing me to drop into the basement just as Carol fired toward Jake's position. Smoke and confusion filled the confined space. Federal agents shouted commands while trying to secure multiple suspects simultaneously. In the chaos, Carol had positioned herself behind the computer equipment with a clear shot at both Jake and Sarah, who were huddled together near the far wall. "Drop your weapon," agents commanded repeatedly. But Carol's position gave her tactical advantage. She could eliminate witnesses while using expensive equipment as cover against return fire. Jake had been wounded, though not seriously. Blood stained his shirt sleeve where Carol's shot had grazed him, but he remained conscious and alert. Sarah was applying pressure to the wound while trying to shield Jake with her own body, demonstrating courage that made me proud of my son's choice and companions. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Jake's shock at seeing me was genuine, but relief was obvious in his voice. "Protecting my family," I replied, helping Sarah with makeshift bandages torn from my shirt. The basement's layout worked against federal agents trying to safely secure all suspects. Carol's associates had either surrendered or fled through tunnel exits I'd never known existed, but Carol herself remained entrenched behind equipment worth millions. Destroying it to neutralize her threat wasn't acceptable to law enforcement. My insurance investigation background included extensive training in criminal psychology and crisis negotiation. Reading people's motivations and predicting their actions under stress had been essential skills for identifying fraud. Carol's behavior suggested someone planning escape rather than final confrontation. "Carol Morrison," I called out, using her real name to establish credibility. Former NSA contractor, specialized in electronic surveillance and financial network security. "You're too smart to throw your life away on a murder charge." Her response showed I'd guessed correctly about her background and motivations. Insurance investigator Ashton Reynolds, 30 years with Mid-America Insurance. Husband of Martha Reynolds, whose investigation 5 years ago required permanent termination. Hearing Carol casually discuss Martha's murder as necessary business decision filled me with rage, but also provided crucial insight into her psychology. She viewed people as assets or obstacles, not human beings with inherent value. "Killing witnesses guarantees death penalty," I continued, moving closer while appearing to focus on treating Jake's wound. "Surrender guarantees life sentence with possibility of parole. Mathematics aren't complicated." Federal agents held their positions while allowing me to attempt negotiation. Their tactical assessment apparently concluded that civilian intervention might succeed where direct confrontation had stalled. Jake's courage emerged, despite his injury and fear. "Carol, these agents already have everything they need from the computers. Killing us won't change what you're facing legally." Sarah supported his words by revealing information that surprised everyone. "FBI agents have been monitoring patient record access for 6 weeks. Every file you made me pull, every password you forced me to use, everything was tracked and recorded." Carol's expression showed dawning realization that her operation had been compromised far longer than she'd understood. Federal investigation hadn't begun with tonight's activity. It had been building systematically, gathering evidence of the entire network. "Your associates in Atlanta, Denver, and Seattle were arrested simultaneously tonight," I added, hoping this was true based on Mrs. Patterson's earlier comments. $53 million in stolen funds recovered, 22 arrests across 4 states. The scope of the coordinated law enforcement response became clear as Carol absorbed this information. Her criminal organization wasn't just being disrupted locally. The entire network was being dismantled through evidence Jake's forced cooperation had helped provide. "My son's not a criminal," I said firmly. "He's a victim who was blackmailed into participation. Sarah's not a criminal. She's a victim who was drugged and photographed without consent, then forced to compromise her professional ethics." Carol's weapon remained trained on Jake and Sarah, but her attention was shifting as she processed the tactical situation. Federal agents surrounding her, her associates captured or fled, stolen funds recovered, evidence sufficient for multiple life sentences already secured. "What's your endgame here?" I asked. "Kill 2 innocent people and guarantee your own death? Or surrender and live to potentially see freedom again in 20 years? Jake struggled to stand despite his injury, demonstrating determination that reminded me of Martha's stubborn courage. "Dad, she's been planning this for months. There's tunnels behind these walls, escape routes, backup plans. Don't let her get close to you." Sarah supported Jake while revealing additional information. She showed us architectural plans for 6 other houses. This operation was moving to different neighborhoods every few months. The pattern of their criminal enterprise became clear. Recruit vulnerable young men through blackmail, force them to operate sophisticated equipment, steal millions through technology-based financial crimes, then abandon them to face legal consequences while leadership relocated to new areas. Your grandson Tommy in California, I said, hoping Mrs. Patterson's story would provide leverage. Similar operation, similar methods. How many families have you destroyed with these recruitment tactics? Carol's reaction confirmed that she was indeed connected to Tommy's situation. Her organization had been operating this scheme for years across multiple states, leaving behind traumatized young men and devastated families, while accumulating massive profits. Federal agents were closing their perimeter, but Carol's position remained strong enough to threaten hostages. The expensive computer equipment provided cover, while giving her clear shots at multiple targets. Professional training made her dangerous, even in disadvantageous circumstances. Jake's cooperation tonight provides evidence to convict everyone involved. I continued. Your operation's finished, regardless of what happens next. Only question is whether you add double murder charges to financial crimes. Jake found strength despite his fear and injury. She said Mom was asking too many questions at the bank, said someone had to make sure she stopped investigating. Hearing confirmation that Martha's death was planned murder because of her professional integrity filled me with determination to ensure Carol faced justice. Martha had died protecting innocent people's financial security. Jake's forced participation had helped expose the same criminals who killed his mother. Surrender now, I said firmly, and my son's testimony focuses on your associate's threats and coercion. Fight this, and his testimony emphasizes your personal responsibility for multiple murders. The psychological pressure was working. Carol's expression showed internal debate between desperate escape attempts and rational assessment of her situation. Federal agents held their positions while giving negotiation space to develop. Suddenly, Carol's weapon swung away from Jake toward me. Martha's investigation would have exposed our entire operation. Killing her bought us 5 years of profitable expansion. Killing you eliminates the last witness to her discoveries. Federal agents couldn't risk shots, while she held clear line of fire on civilians. The standoff continued with increasing tension as Carol's desperate situation made her more dangerous rather than more rational. But Jake's courage provided the solution. Despite his wound, he moved quickly to place himself between Carol's weapon and me. You've destroyed enough families. It ends here. In that moment of distraction, federal agents acted with coordinated precision. Carol was disarmed and secured before she could threaten anyone further. The nightmare that had consumed our family for months was finally ending. 6 weeks after that terrifying midnight confrontation in my basement, I sat on the back porch watching Jake work on a classic Ford truck, his hands steady for the first time in months. The healing process had been gradual for all of us, but today felt like a genuine turning point. Sarah had just received official notification that all charges against her were being dropped, and Jake's cooperation with federal investigators was helping convict the entire criminal network. The legal resolution exceeded our most optimistic expectations. Carol Morrison received life sentences in 3 states for Martha's murder, conspiracy charges, and financial crimes totaling over $50 million. All stolen funds were recovered and returned to victims. The coordinated arrests across 4 states dismantled an organization that had been operating for 8 years. Jake's status as protected witness came with restrictions but also opportunities. Federal prosecutors praised his courage in testifying against Carol's organization, noting that his evidence would prevent similar operations from targeting other vulnerable young men. The witness protection consideration was eventually deemed unnecessary after all associates were captured or killed resisting arrest. Our father-son relationship had been completely transformed. Instead of surface-level conversations about work and weather, we now talked openly about emotions, fears, and family history. Jake's shame about being manipulated gradually gave way to understanding that sophisticated criminals exploit vulnerability rather than character weakness. I should have talked to you sooner, Jake admitted during one of our daily conversations. Should have trusted you to help instead of thinking I had to protect everyone alone. Professional counseling helped all of us process the trauma. Jake learned strategies for recognizing manipulation tactics and rebuilding self-confidence. Sarah received support for recovering from blackmail victimization and professional reputation concerns. I worked through delayed grief about Martha's murder and guilt about missing signs of Jake's distress. Jake's return to work at Thompson's Auto Repair became a symbol of normal life resuming. Pete Thompson welcomed him back with understanding about the circumstances, even offering flexible scheduling for court appearances. The steady, honest work helped restore Jake's sense of self-worth after months of forced criminal activity. Sarah's professional recovery was remarkable. County General Hospital implemented new security protocols based on her experience, and she became an advocate for healthcare workers facing similar threats. The medical board not only cleared her of any wrongdoing, but commended her cooperation with law enforcement, despite personal risk. Their relationship grew stronger through shared trauma and recovery. The honesty forced by crisis laid foundations for genuine partnership. Jake's proposal 6 months later surprised no one who'd watched them support each other through the darkest period of their lives. Mrs. Patterson received federal recognition for her crucial role in exposing the criminal organization. Her methodical evidence gathering and coordination with law enforcement had been essential for building prosecutable cases. The quiet widow who tended her garden became a neighborhood hero whose courage saved multiple families from victimization. Community impact extended beyond our immediate situation. Neighborhood association meetings now include presentations about recognizing criminal recruitment tactics. Parents received education about protecting young adults during vulnerable periods. Local banks implemented additional security measures to prevent similar infiltration. The basement that had housed sophisticated criminal equipment was converted into a family workshop where Jake, Sarah, and I restored classic cars together. The space that once represented forced participation in financial crimes became a symbol of honest work and family cooperation. Martha's legacy was finally honored appropriately. Using recovered stolen funds, we established the Martha Reynolds Foundation, providing scholarships for students pursuing financial crime investigation. Annual community awareness events educated families about recognizing and reporting criminal recruitment tactics targeting vulnerable young people. Jake's transformation from victim to advocate gave him purpose beyond personal recovery. He began speaking at community groups about resisting criminal manipulation, emphasizing that seeking help demonstrates strength rather than weakness. His willingness to discuss his experience helped other young men avoid similar exploitation. Sarah's professional growth accelerated as she developed expertise in healthcare security and patient protection. Her first-hand experience with criminal infiltration of medical systems made her a valuable consultant for hospitals implementing stronger safeguards. Career advancement came through turning trauma into specialized knowledge. My own retirement took new direction through consulting work with federal financial crime task forces. Insurance investigation skills translated well to helping other families facing similar situations. Finding purpose in preventing other parents from experiencing what we'd endured gave meaning to our survival. The house itself had been transformed. New security systems, updated locks, basement renovation, and regular law enforcement visits created sense of safety. But more importantly, open communication replaced secrecy. Family dinners included honest conversation about concerns, fears, and daily challenges. Jake's engagement party brought together everyone who'd supported us through the crisis. Mrs. Patterson served as honorary grandmother. Federal agents who'd risked their lives to protect Jake attended as valued friends. Thompson's auto repair colleagues celebrated Jake's courage and resilience. Our small gathering represented community support that makes recovery possible. Martha's memory was present throughout the celebration. Stories about her integrity, courage, and determination to protect innocent people reminded us that her death had ultimately led to preventing hundreds of families from suffering financial devastation. Justice delayed does not mean justice denied when good people refuse to give up seeking truth. Sarah's parents, initially concerned about Jake's involvement in criminal activity, came to understand the complexity of victimization and recovery. Their acceptance of Jake demonstrated that people can overcome initial judgments when they understand full circumstances. Family support systems grow stronger through surviving crises together. Wedding planning became a healing activity that focused our attention on positive futures rather than traumatic past. Jake and Sarah's commitment to honesty, mutual support, and community service reflected lessons learned through their forced participation in criminal activity. Their marriage would be built on foundations tested by the worst possible circumstances. The final legal proceedings concluded with Carol's associates receiving sentences ranging from 15 to 40 years. The criminal organization that had seemed so powerful and untouchable was completely dismantled. Recovered evidence led to additional arrests in 6 other states, disrupting similar operations before they could fully establish themselves. Jake's testimony at the final sentencing hearing was powerful and eloquent. He described the psychological manipulation, escalating threats, and eventual realization that cooperation was endangering innocent people. His words helped judges understand the difference between willing participation and coerced compliance. 3 years later, the Martha Reynolds Foundation had provided scholarships to 24 students studying financial crime investigation. Annual awards recognized law enforcement officers whose work protected families from sophisticated financial crimes. Community education programs had reached over 5,000 parents and young adults throughout the region. Jake and Sarah's first child, a daughter named Hope, brought new meaning to our family's survival. Her presence in our rebuilt basement workshop, watching 3 generations work together on restoration projects, symbolized life continuing positively despite past trauma. Family traditions were being established around honest work, open communication, and community service. The classic Ford truck Jake had been working on that first day of real recovery became a family project spanning 2 years. When completed, we donated it to a local charity auction supporting crime victims. The truck that represented Jake's return to honest work generated funds to help other families rebuild after criminal victimization. Mrs. Patterson's garden became a neighborhood gathering place where families shared concerns and support. Her wisdom about recognizing criminal recruitment tactics was sought by parents throughout our community. The quiet widow had become a respected elder whose experience protected multiple families from exploitation. My own healing continued through work with other parents whose children had been targeted by criminal organizations. Each family faced unique circumstances, but patterns of vulnerability, manipulation, and recovery showed remarkable consistency. Professional training combined with personal experience made me effective at providing both practical advice and emotional support. Looking back on that terrifying night when Carol held weapons on my wounded son, I realized that love sometimes requires fighting for people rather than simply trusting them to handle problems alone. Protection involves both watchfulness and willingness to act decisively when family members face dangers beyond their ability to resist. The lessons learned through our family's crisis extended beyond crime prevention. Open communication prevents small problems from becoming major crises. Community connections provide security that individual vigilance cannot achieve. Asking for help demonstrates wisdom rather than weakness. Most importantly, family strength comes from honest relationships built on mutual support rather than protective deception. Our story had a genuinely happy ending, but only because good people refused to remain passive when they recognized criminal activity threatening their community. Mrs. Patterson's courage, federal agents' professionalism, Jake's eventual honesty, Sarah's cooperation despite personal risk, and our family's commitment to supporting each other through crisis all contributed to justice being served. Today, Jake manages Thompson's auto repair after Pete's retirement. Sarah directs healthcare security for the regional hospital network. Their daughter Hope takes her first steps around our workshop while 3 generations work together on projects that honor Martha's memory through honest labor and family cooperation. The basement computers that once facilitated financial crimes have been replaced by workbenches where we restore vehicles for families facing economic hardship. The space that represented forced participation in criminal activity now symbolizes voluntary service to community members who need assistance. Criminal organizations continue targeting vulnerable young people through sophisticated recruitment tactics. Our family's experience provides blueprint for recognition, resistance, and recovery that can help other families avoid similar victimization. Sharing our story honestly, including mistakes and lessons learned, might prevent other parents from experiencing the terror of discovering their children trapped in criminal situations. Sometimes protecting the people we love requires extraordinary measures, Sometimes family relationships survive crisis better than they endured normal circumstances. Sometimes delayed justice provides deeper satisfaction than immediate resolution. Most importantly, sometimes the worst experiences in our lives prepare us to help other people facing similar challenges. Have you ever felt that something was seriously wrong in your family but struggled with how to investigate without destroying relationships? How do you balance protecting loved ones with respecting their privacy and independence? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because your experience might help other families recognize warning signs before crisis develops. If this story resonated with your own experiences or concerns, please like this video to help others find information that might protect their families. Subscribe for more stories about recognizing and overcoming dangerous situations that threaten people we care about. Share this with anyone who might benefit from understanding how criminal organizations target vulnerable family members. Thank you for listening to our family's story. May your relationships be built on trust, honesty, and mutual support that makes it impossible for external threats to divide the people you love most. Until next time, remember that protecting our families sometimes requires courage we didn't know we possessed.